And welcome to another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement. I'm here at the News Forum, where all voices matter. As our election coverage continues, the News Forum relies on various individuals with skill sets or experiences that they bring to the table. I'm pleased to have Mr. Quito Maggi on the show today. He's president of Main Street Research, a public opinion and market research company. Welcome to the program, Quito.
Thanks for having me, Tony.
So obviously you are polling daily because we're in the middle of an election, and you've been doing so since the start of the election, I'm sure of that. So can you just give us a bit of a tour of what your major findings are so far?
Yeah, so we started a little bit before the election, actually, because, of course, to be able to report on day one, on the Monday, a 3-day roll, we started on the Friday before, on the 12th of August. And, you know, summer sampling, lots of people on vacation, you know, it's a very different audience in August than it is now in September, like we're at right now. People are starting to think about back to school, back to work, what the fall plans are, what does post-pandemic look like. We started off, obviously, pre-election, very, very different picture than where we are today, with the Liberals with a very substantial lead. We showed that pretty much all year, right up until early August. And then it started tightening up in the early days of the election. And then, you know, we saw some unusual regional shifts in Atlantic. We saw the Conservatives do very, very well in Atlantic. We saw some weird shifts in BC. Again, Conservatives doing very, very well in British Columbia. And then the demographic shifts have been the most fascinating to see. Among male voters, most especially, we started off the campaign with about an 8-point gap between the way men and women vote. And now it's extended to more than almost 30-point difference. Wow. Now males vote Conservative, leading the Liberals by 20 points among male voters. And now only slightly trail Liberals even among female voters. And there's great disparities among age as well. So it's a very, very unusual election. Still way too early to kind of predict what's going to happen on the, you know, at the end. Lots and lots of seats still in play within that sort of 5% margin. So it's definitely not boring. It hasn't been boring, and I suspect it's not going to be a boring finish either.
No, I will concur with you on that for sure. And there's so many next questions relating to what you just said, so we'll unpack it over the course of the show. But just to give our audience a sense of your professionalism, I mean, you take into account the fact that you know, some people may not be available because of summer vacations and those kinds of things. You make sure your demographics are solid in terms of the types of people that you are polling, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we weigh our samples just like all pollsters for age, gender, region, and language in Quebec. We also provide, you know, we also ask about income, education, race. And although we don't weigh for those factors, we do take a look at the sample and make sure that it remains relatively representative within a couple of points, and it has been. You know, we use an RDD sample, stands for random digit dial. Basically, it's a computer generated list of phone numbers that might be real phone numbers, and it gives us, you know, a better random sample. As you know, in Canada, we can't dial cell phones like we can in the United States, because there's different rules. We can't even buy a cell phone list here in Canada, so we have to use RDD to get that diverse sample. If we just called landlines, we'd end up speaking to, you know, 70-80% people over 65. I haven't had a landline myself in, I don't even know, 15 years at least. So no, so it's very much still very, very representative. When you're looking at our weights, our max weight is 2.6. So in a sample in a national sample to have a max weight of 2.6. It's a very, very flat sample, very, very representative. We've tested this over and over and over again. Pretty confident that our sampling is, but
Hold
I
on,
will point out.
hold that thought though. We are going to take our first commercial break, so we will get back to Quito Maggi after that break. And welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, talking with Mr. Quito Maggi. He is the president of Main Street Research here in Canada. Quito, sorry to interrupt you there. You were making a point about your sampling.
Yeah, I was going to point out that I have speculated on social media and a number of interviews about this audience difference between summer sampling and other times. And I've been looking at historic data for travel and people who are home. Traditionally, in August of any given year, about 30% of the population is not in their principal residence. They are, at a cottage, at campgrounds, road tripping, as a lot of Canadians do. August seems to be the most popular month for those types of activities. Anyone who's tried to rent a camping space or get an Airbnb lately knows exactly what I'm talking about. Or lately, a couple of weeks ago when we were still in the dog days of summer. So there's a lot of people that are away. What does this mean in terms of how our sample is? We can look at it demographically and say, we're waiting for all the right things. It's very, very flat, but there is definitely a potential effect on those people. And when they come home from vacation, now that we're sitting here just after Labor Day, we could still see some shifts given that population, there's a different mental, it's more of a psychographic profile as opposed to a demographic profile.
Right.
So it doesn't mean that these numbers are going to continue exactly. We have seen shifts like this in the past. In the last Ontario election, we saw it. Wide poll divergence at the beginning, converged towards the end, and everyone agreed. And in the election of 2015, that sort of marathon election that started in the summer and went into the fall, we definitely saw a shift between that summer sampling in August and early September and what we saw later in the fall.
For sure.
So that's the caveat on where these numbers stand. And, of course, things can always change, and you know more about that than I do.
Yeah, they can change, and sometimes they do. I do want to delve into some details, however. So what have you found about Canadians' views on what the major issues are?
Yeah, it's really interesting that, this election, everyone at the beginning, the speculation was that, this is a pandemic management referendum. Like most pandemic elections that we've had have been sort of these referendums on how premiers are handling the pandemic. And that was pretty consistent across 6 or 7 elections that we've had between 2020 and 2021. And then we hit a snag when the Nova Scotia election happened. If you remember that result, just at the beginning of this campaign call, August 17th was election day. And in the lead up to that one, we saw we saw what was a late break and a surprise majority win by now Premier Tim Houston and the PCs. And that was the first time. And, the number one issue there was healthcare access. And what we saw in the early days of the election is the pandemic management really dropped off a cliff as a top issue. Affordability, healthcare access, jobs in the economy. These have all sort of now retaken the lead over pandemic management. It's almost as if people kind of assumed the pandemic is over largely. And that now they want to know, okay, what's next? So it's coming down more to plans around those things: affordability, affordable housing, jobs in the economy, climate change has come back into the picture as well.
Sure.
And these issues that dominated more the 2019 election have now returned. It's not about pandemic management. It's not that referendum anymore. So Canadians want to hear what people's plans are. And I think that's why the Liberals were caught unprepared to campaign on that front.
So I do want to get into, after the break, because we're going to take a short break now, after the break, what plans of the different parties are starting to resonate given the findings that you've made. But that's an important conversation, so I don't want to split it up. We are going to take a short break now, but we'll be right back after the break with Mr. Quito Maggi. Stay with us. Quito, I posed that question just before the break. Given the findings that you've had about how there's been a shift in attitude away from pandemic towards sort of these bread and butter economic issues and environmental issues, have you found anything yet about which campaigns from the major political parties are resonating on those issues?
Yeah, I think the order in which the campaigns released their plans. Remember, Jagmeet Singh and the NDP released their platform 2 or 3 days before the election, and they rose very, very quickly in the polls. We have them about 14, 15 going in, and they're sitting at about 20% early on. They've pulled back a little bit from that number now. And then Erin O'Toole and the Conservatives sort of surprisingly released their entire platform on day 2 or 3 of the election, and again have been rolling out those plans one at a time. And again, we saw this. We saw as their platforms were released, a strong economic focus from Erin O'Toole and the Conservatives about the pandemic recovery, jobs in the economy, managing the deficit and returning to a balanced budget. And that's when we saw them, kind of take off and first bring it to a tie, then extend a lead to a very substantial lead at one point, and have now pulling back again. The Liberals released their platform last. I don't think that, that was, they kind of got caught unprepared for the impact of the plans that were released by the NDP and the Conservatives. I think on social policy, we're seeing more Canadians choosing Jagmeet Singh over Justin Trudeau in terms of climate change, in terms of how to deal with Indigenous reconciliation and racial inequality. We've been asking those questions of Canadians: who's better at these things? And Jagmeet Singh has been beating Trudeau on social policy. Erin O'Toole's been beating him on all economic policy and as well foreign affairs. And I think for the first time probably ever, foreign affairs, because of what happened with Afghanistan early on in the campaign, and it's a story that's continued, that's been a big issue. And again, I think it was something the Liberals got caught unprepared for. Time will tell, but and there's still an eternity until Election Day, of course. But I think, like I said, it's not boring. So
yeah. Could you? I think it was one of your colleagues, maybe your vice president, who wrote an article I read recently about the issue of trust, and that this was something that Justin Trudeau had on his side for 2 election cycles, maybe degrading a bit. Have you been following that at all as well?
Yeah, my vice president, Joseph Angolano, wrote an op-ed for iPolitics based on those 7 questions. So we've been asking these questions since the beginning of the election, but we had not released those numbers until that day. And then we've been releasing them every day since. And, this speaks to why the changes in the electoral fortunes of all the different parties, in that, when we ask those questions about who can better manage A, B, C. Pandemic management was the only question on that first day that Justin Trudeau, the incumbent prime minister, it was the only thing the Canadians trusted him on to be able to deliver on pandemic management and getting Canada out of the pandemic, everything related to the pandemic. But in every other measure, he was trailing one of either Jagmeet Singh or Aaron O'Toole, or in some cases, both. Imagine Indigenous reconciliation, that the Canadians would have told us that they would trust Jagmeet Singh almost 3-1 over the sitting prime minister. Indigenous reconciliation and racial and tackling racial inequality, almost 3-1 over the sitting prime minister. And even Aaron, maybe that's disrespectful of Aaron. Aaron O'Toole beat Justin Trudeau pretty significantly in that question, at least early on. That fact, tells us that really Canadians have lost a lot of faith and trust in the Prime Minister, in Justin Trudeau.
We're going to have to take, I'm sorry, I have to do this to you. We're going to have to take another break. Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm Tony Clement here with Mr. Quito Maggi, president of Main Street Research. Quito, very important point you were making before the break. Please continue with that point, and then I've got another couple questions for you.
Yeah, I was saying that the conclusion that my colleague, Dr. Joe Spangolano, came to and wrote that piece about trust, that Justin Trudeau, in a very, in 6 years, when you think about it, that he's gone from nearly unbeatable as a perception to now potentially facing defeat in this election, that he came in with a huge lead, that really it's about him, and that Canadians have lost trust in Justin Trudeau. And it matches with what we're hearing sort of more anecdotally from different candidates and people out there, telling us more, well, they like the Liberals, they like the plan, but they don't like him. So, on the ballot box question, which I think is going to be, do you trust Justin Trudeau? I think that's a ballot box question the Liberals lose in the end. Wow. It's still too early to tell.
Yeah. No, I get that.
For sure.
I was going to ask you about, and I hope I have time to ask you about battlegrounds, but I've got to ask this question because it ties into what you're saying and what we've seen on the campaign trail for the last 7 or 8 days. How angry is the electorate?
I'm not sure that it's angry. I think there's a lot of frustration and anxiety. It's been a difficult year and a half. There's a lot of, we've all acknowledged sort of the challenges of the pandemic on mental health. We've been through 3 now, entering potentially in the middle of or starting a 4th wave, depending on your perspective. Potential for another lockdown. I think all these things has put people in kind of a not the best mood. And I think I talked at the beginning of this campaign about what happened in Afghanistan, and that things like that tend to be sort of these emotional triggers. And that further sort of put people in a foul mood. We knew that people didn't want an election because they told us, 65% of Canadians before the election said, and now they're kind of mad. They're going to punish whoever is calling an election. And if you're an incumbent, if you're Doug Ford or somebody else out there who's having an election next year, I'd be a little worried, because I think the electorate is in the mood to punish people right now, and not necessarily because of anything real, but they're just, it's been a difficult couple of years.
It has been indeed. So we've got about a minute and a half left. So I'd love to get you talked about regions and demographics a little bit earlier. What do you see as the key battlegrounds?
Yeah, you're going to hear everybody talk about the same 2 regions. Really, it comes down to the 905 and then in Quebec, sort of the North Shore, South Shore, Eastern townships. So I always reference my bellwether riding is always Shefford in Quebec. It's the one where the Liberals won it in 2015. They lost it to the Bloc in 2019. We have them leading there again now, but it's very, very close. Could flip. And then the 905, but part of the reason why I think Aaron O'Toole had presented such a centrist platform for Conservative Party, including a carbon tax this time, is because he knew he had to appeal that nothing short of a carbon tax or climate change plan, something that came close, would appeal there. And it seems largely to be working. And there's a few other small pieces, like his proposal on animal cruelty, which I thought was
Yes,
very,
that was
very
very
interesting.
Yeah.
That one is really appeals to that demographic. It's the 905 suburban housewives, and there's 17 million pets in Canada. It's more than half the population, about
And on
8
that,
million.
and on that, I hope some of them are watching this program. And Quito, I do have to cut you off. I'm sorry, we've run out of time. Gosh, we could have gone for another hour, I know, but you're a busy guy
Sure.
too. Thank you so much for being on the program and offering your insights.
Thanks so much, Tony.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Felt badly for cutting off Quito Maggi, president of Main Street Research. A lot of great insights there about the state of the Canadian electorate in this election, the economic issues, the social issues, all of those he presented very well. We'll be continuing to cover the federal election. Please stay on this channel, and thanks for watching.